Pam Bondi fined $100,000 for wearing a cross, but her response leaves the judge looking ridiculous in front of everyone. The gold cross caught the courtroom light as Pam Bondi rose to speak, a small defiant glimmer against her crisp navy suit. In the momentary silence before she could utter her first word, Judge Raymond Hoffman's eyes locked onto the necklace with such sudden intensity that several jurors followed his gaze. "Miss Bondi," Judge Hoffman's voice cracked through the courtroom like a whip, "approach the bench, now." The tension that surged through courtroom 306 of the Tampa Federal Building was immediate and electric. Pam had been standing before judges for over 20 years, but something in Hoffman's tone, a cold fury barely contained by judicial decorum, made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a measured rhythm. Her client, Jeffrey Reardon, CEO of Gulf Coast Manufacturing, shot her a puzzled look. They'd been preparing for this contract dispute for months, and nothing in their preparation had suggested any issues with the judge. As Pam reached the bench, Judge Hoffman leaned forward, his voice low enough that only she and the clerk beside him could hear. "That religious symbol around your neck," he said, each word precise and brittle. "Remove it immediately." Pam's hand instinctively moved to the cross, a gift from her grandmother on the day she passed the bar. She'd worn it to every court appearance of her career. "Excuse me, Your Honor." The words came out reflexively, her mind still processing the unexpected demand. Judge Hoffman's eyes narrowed. The clerk beside him stared fixedly at her computer screen, clearly uncomfortable. "You heard me, Counselor. That cross violates the neutrality of my courtroom. Religion has no place in federal proceedings." Pam felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression professionally neutral. Judge Hoffman's reputation preceded him. Appointed 3 years ago, he was known for his uncompromising demeanor and unpredictable rulings. The attorneys who appeared before him called him Hurricane Hoffman behind his back, a force of nature that could shift direction without warning and leave devastation in his wake. "Your Honor, with all respect, this is personal jewelry. It doesn't disrupt court proceedings or create bias any more than a wedding ring would." Something dangerous flashed across Hoffman's face. "Are you questioning my authority in my own courtroom, Ms. Bondi?" The courtroom had fallen completely silent behind them. Though the conversation at the bench was quiet, the tension was palpable. The opposing counsel, Martin Chen, was watching intently, his legal pad forgotten before him. "No, Your Honor," Pam replied carefully. "I'm simply stating that this cross has personal significance to me, and I don't care if it was blessed by the Pope himself." Hoffman cut her off. "In my courtroom, we maintain absolute neutrality. That means no religious symbols on display by any officer of the court. Return to your table and remove it, or face the consequences." For a moment, Pam considered her options. She could comply. Tuck the necklace into her blouse and proceed with her client's case. It would be the pragmatic choice. But something in Hoffman's tone, the arbitrary exercise of power with no legal basis, struck a chord too deep to ignore. She straightened her spine. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Your Honor." Judge Hoffman's jaw tightened. "Then you leave me no choice. Return to your table, Ms. Bondi." As Pam walked back, she could feel every eye in the courtroom following her. Jeffrey leaned toward her and whispered, "What's happening?" Before she could answer, Judge Hoffman's voice boomed across the courtroom. "Let the record show that attorney Pamela Bondi has been instructed to remove a religious symbol that violates the neutrality of these proceedings and has willfully refused to comply." His gavel struck the sound block with unnecessary force. "This court finds her in contempt and issues a fine of $100,000 to be paid within 30 days. The reaction was immediate. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Jeffrey's face went pale. Martin Chen, the opposing counsel, dropped his pen. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers frozen above her stenotype machine. The amount was staggering, vindictive even. Contempt fines for attorneys typically range from $500 to perhaps $5,000 in extreme cases. $100,000 wasn't a fine. It was financial ruin, deliberately inflicted. Pam felt a rush of adrenaline but kept her voice steady. Your Honor, I must formally object to this fine. There is no legal basis for prohibiting religious jewelry in a federal courtroom, and the amount is clearly punitive and excessive. Judge Hoffman's face darkened further. Objection noted. The fine stands. Would you like to make it $200,000, Ms. Bondi? Because questioning my rulings further will do exactly that. The threat hung in the air. Pam became acutely aware of her client beside her, of his case that needed proper representation. This was bigger than her now. Pushing further might impact her ability to serve her client effectively. No, Your Honor, she replied, her voice cool and professional despite the rage building inside her. I would like the record to reflect my objection on First Amendment grounds, but I'm prepared to proceed with today's hearing. Wise choice, Hoffman said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now, regarding the contract dispute between Gulf Coast Manufacturing and Coastal Suppliers. The next 3 hours was surreal. Pam presented her client's case with flawless precision, cross-examined witnesses with surgical accuracy, and objected at exactly the right moments, all while the weight of $100,000 fine hung over her and the gold cross remained visible at her neck. Internally, her mind was racing. Every attorney in Tampa knew about Judge Hoffman's difficult personality, but this wasn't mere difficulty. This was an abuse of power, a direct attack on religious expression, and a violation of constitutional rights so blatant it was breathtaking. When Judge Hoffman finally called for the lunch recess, the courtroom erupted into whispers as soon as he departed. Jeffrey turned to her, his face a mixture of concern and disbelief. Pam, what the hell just happened? $100,000 for wearing a necklace? Pam gathered her documents deliberately, buying time to compose her thoughts. It happened because Judge Hoffman decided to abuse his power today. This is insane, Jeffrey said, running a hand through his silver hair. I can help with the fine. The company can— No, Pam cut him off firmly. This isn't your battle, and I won't let it become a financial burden for you or the company. This is between me and a judge who's overstepped his bounds. Martin Chen, the opposing counsel, approached their table. He'd been opposing Pam in cases for over a decade. They were rivals, but maintained professional respect. Pam, that was completely out of line, he said quietly, glancing toward the door where Hoffman had exited. I've never seen anything like it. Neither have I, Martin, but I appreciate you saying so. Chen lowered his voice further. For what it's worth, I think half the attorneys in Tampa will be ready to support you if you challenge this. Hoffman's been getting worse, but this— He shook his head. As the courtroom cleared, Pam's phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a string of text messages from Lauren Rivera, her paralegal of 7 years. Pam, what's happening? The clerk called our office about a contempt fine. $100,000. Is that a typo? Reporters are already calling. Tampa Bay Times, Channel 8, Fox 13. Word spreading fast. Pam wasn't surprised. Courthouses were gossip factories, and a story this outrageous would travel at light speed. She quickly texted back. It's real. Hoffman fined me for wearing my cross necklace, meeting you at the office in 20. She turned to Jeffrey. We have a good morning. Your testimony was compelling, and Chen's witnesses didn't land any significant blows. But I need you to understand something. This situation with Hoffman might create some media attention. Jeffrey nodded grimly. Do what you need to do, Pam. I trust you. She gathered her briefcase and headed for the exit. As she pushed through the heavy oak doors into the corridor, a young court clerk hurried to catch up with her. Ms. Bondi, the woman said, glancing around nervously. I just wanted to say, that was wrong in there. I've worked for Judge Hoffman for 2 years and he's never done anything like that before. Pam studied the woman, barely 30, likely fresh out of law school, working her way up the judicial system ladder. Thank you for saying that. What's your name? Sarah Mitchell. I'm just a clerk, but... She hesitated, lowering her voice. Judge Hoffman wears a Masonic ring every day. No one says anything about it. With that, she turned and hurried back toward the courtroom, leaving Pam standing in the corridor with this new piece of information. A Masonic ring, a symbol with religious connotations that Hoffman apparently had no problem displaying in his neutral courtroom. The hypocrisy was staggering. By the time Pam pushed through the glass doors of Bondi Legal Group 20 minutes later, the situation had already escalated. 3 local news vans were parked outside the building, and her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications. Lauren met her at the elevator, tablet in hand. Conference room A is ready. Jackson and Maria are waiting. I called them as soon as I heard. Jackson Chen was Pam's top associate, a brilliant Harvard law graduate with a specialty in constitutional law. Maria Delgado handled the firm's media relations and had previously worked as a legal correspondent for CNN. If Pam was going to fight this battle, these were exactly the people she needed in her corner. What's the damage so far? Pam asked, as they walked briskly down the corridor. Lauren swiped through her tablet. Local stations are running with it. Tampa Bay Times already has an online article. Social media is exploding. Char Crossfine is trending in Florida. That was fast. It's the perfect storm, Pam. Religious freedom, judicial overreach, and a female attorney being targeted by a male judge. Everyone has an opinion. They entered the conference room where Jackson and Maria were huddled over a laptop. Both looked up as Pam entered. Tell me exactly what happened, Jackson said, legal pad ready. For the next 10 minutes, Pam recounted the morning's events in precise detail. Hoffman's demand, her refusal, the excessive fine, and the information about his Masonic ring. Jackson took meticulous notes while Maria occasionally muttered under her breath about media angles. When Pam finished, Jackson leaned back in his chair. This is textbook First Amendment violation. Hoffman doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. But he has power, Maria pointed out. And $100 grand is clearly meant to intimidate. Pam nodded. The amount isn't accidental. He wants to make me an example, either pay a devastating fine or submit to his arbitrary rule. The timing is interesting too, Lauren added. Hoffman's up for consideration for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. This kind of hardline stance on courtroom neutrality might play well with certain segments of the Judicial Selection Committee. At my expense, Pam said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Jackson tapped his pen against his legal pad. We need to fight this on 2 fronts, legal and public. Legally, we'll file an emergency motion to vacate the contempt order. I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. And publicly? Pam asked, turning to Maria. Maria's eyes gleamed. Before joining Bondi Legal, she'd made her reputation exposing judicial misconduct. We control the narrative. Right now, people are hearing, attorney fined for religious symbol. We need them to hear judge abuses power to attack religious freedom. The Florida Bar Association will have to respond, Lauren noted. They can't ignore a fine this size over something so trivial. And the Judicial Qualifications Commission, Jackson added. If enough attention falls on Hoffman, they might open an investigation. Pam moved to the window, looking down at the news vans below. This wasn't how she'd planned to spend her week. Gulf Coast manufacturing versus coastal suppliers should have been her focus, a straightforward contract dispute with millions at stake for her client. Instead, she was suddenly thrust into a constitutional battle with her own financial future and professional reputation on the line. Pam? Lauren's voice pulled her from her thoughts. What do you want to do? Pam turned back to her team. I want to fight. Not just for myself, but because this can't be allowed to stand. If Hoffman can fine me $100,000 for wearing a cross, what's to stop other judges from similar abuses? Jackson nodded. I'll start drafting the motion. We'll cite Employment Division versus Smith, Church of the Lukumi Babaluai versus City of Hialeah, and definitely Capital Square Review Board v. Pinette. Don't forget Town of Greece versus Galloway, Pam added. It reinforces that the mere presence of religious symbols doesn't constitute government endorsement. What about media? Maria asked. We've got at least a dozen requests for comments already. Fox News wants you for a live interview tonight. Pam considered this. Media exposure could help shape public opinion, but it could also antagonize Hoffman further. She still had to appear before him tomorrow afternoon to continue representing Jeffrey. No interviews yet, she decided. Draft a brief statement confirming the fine, expressing my intention to challenge it on constitutional grounds, and emphasizing that I remain focused on my client's case. Let's not pour gasoline on the fire until we've filed our motion. Maria nodded, already typing notes on her laptop. There's something else, Lauren said quietly. Sarah from Judge Hoffman's chambers called while you were driving over. She says Hoffman wants to see you in his chambers tomorrow morning, before court resumes. The room fell silent. A private meeting with the judge who had just issued a punitive fine against her was unusual and potentially problematic. That's irregular, Jackson said carefully. You shouldn't go alone. I agree, Pam replied. Jackson, you'll come as my counsel. Lauren, call Sarah back and confirm the meeting, but make it clear I'll be accompanied by my attorney. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Pam remained in the conference room, finally allowing herself a moment to process the morning's events. She reached for the cross at her neck, the small gold symbol that had unexpectedly thrust her into the center of a constitutional storm. The necklace had been a gift from her grandmother, Elizabeth, a formidable woman who had raised 3 children, alone after her husband died in the Korean War. Remember who you are, Elizabeth had told her on the day Pam passed the bar exam. Stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. Those words resonated now more than ever. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jeffrey. Just saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need me to find another attorney for tomorrow? The message stung. Jeffrey had been her client for 7 years. His company's case was complex and time-sensitive. Switching attorneys mid-trial would put him at a serious disadvantage. Absolutely. Not, she texted back. I'll be there tomorrow, fully prepared. This won't affect your case. She set her phone down and moved to the whiteboard that spanned one wall of the conference room. In precise lettering, she began outlining her strategy. Emergency motion to vacate contempt order, First Amendment defense challenge, excessive punishment document pattern of selective enforcement, Masonic ring, Media Strategy Bar Association complaint, Judicial Qualification Commission. As she wrote, a knock came at the door. It was Maria. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. She handed Pam her tablet, open to Twitter. A post from a local court reporter had gone viral. Breaking. Sources confirm Judge Hoffman permitted attorney Martin Chen to wear a Star of David lapel pin in his courtroom last month. Same judge who today fined Pam Bondi $100K for wearing a cross. Double standard, chancha cross fine. The post included a grainy courtroom photo showing Chen at a hearing, a small but visible Star of David pin on his suit lapel. Pam stared at the image, a cold anger settling in her chest. This wasn't just about religious neutrality, it never had been. This was selective enforcement, personal animus, or both. Get this to Jackson, she said, handing back the tablet. And see if Chen will go on record confirming this. Maria nodded and left. Pam turned back to the whiteboard, adding another point. Prove discriminatory application, Chen's Star of David. The pieces were falling into place. Hoffman's actions weren't just unconstitutional, they were inconsistent with his own past behavior. The picture emerging was of a judge who had specifically targeted her, using his position to inflict financial harm under the pretense of courtroom rules that he selectively enforced. By 7 p.m., the office had transformed into a war room. Jackson had completed a draft of the emergency motion, citing 14 Supreme Court cases, affirming religious expression rights. Lauren had compiled a dossier of Judge Hoffman's past rulings, revealing several instances where he had made controversial comments about religion in the public sphere. Maria had crafted a measured but firm statement that was already being quoted in evening news reports. Pam's phone rang. Jeffrey again. "How are you holding up?" he asked when she answered. "I'm fine, Jeffrey. More concerned about your case than this sideshow." "It's hardly a sideshow when it's your money on the line," he replied. "Listen, I just got off the phone with the board. They've authorized me to cover the fine if needed. We can call it a consultant fee or whatever makes it legal." Pam was touched by the gesture, but shook her head, even though Jeffrey couldn't see. That's not happening, but I appreciate the thought more than you know. You're fighting this for a principle, Pam. I respect that. But don't let pride get in the way if you need help." After they hung up, Pam found herself alone in her office for the first time since the morning. The sun had set, casting Tampa's skyline in twilight shadows. On her desk sat a stack of documents for tomorrow's cross-examinations, work that still needed her attention despite the day's chaos. Her cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, she'd let it go to voicemail, but something compelled her to answer. Pamela Bondi speaking. "Ms. Bondi, this is Sarah Mitchell from Judge Hoffman's chambers." The young clerk's voice was hushed, as if she were calling from somewhere. She shouldn't be. "I shouldn't be doing this, but I thought you should know. The judge has been on the phone all afternoon with Chief Judge Mercer and several members of the 11th Circuit Nominating Committee." Pam straightened in her chair. "Why are you telling me this, Sarah?" A pause. "Because what happened today was wrong, and because—" Another pause. "Judge Hoffman keeps a Bible in his desk drawer. He references it before making difficult rulings. Everyone in chambers knows it." The hypocrisy was staggering. A judge who consulted a Bible before rulings was fining her $100,000 for wearing a cross necklace. "Sarah, would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating that?" "I can't," Sarah replied, her voice tight with regret. "I'd lose my job, my career, everything. I shouldn't even be calling you." "I understand," Pam said, and she did. Sarah was taking a risk, even making this call. "Thank you for telling me." After the call ended, Pam sat in silence, processing this new information. She couldn't use Sarah's insight directly. Doing so would expose the young clerk to retaliation. But knowing that Hoffman was actively discussing the situation with his superiors and nomination committee members was valuable intelligence. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Lauren, holding a tablet. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing it over. The tablet displayed an official statement from the Florida Bar Association, released just minutes earlier. The Florida Bar is aware of the situation involving attorney Pamela Bondi and Judge Raymond Hoffman. While we respect the authority of judges to maintain order in their courtrooms, we are concerned by reports regarding the proportionality of the contempt fine issued today. The Bar has initiated a review of this matter and will be contacting all parties involved. "They're intervening," Lauren said, a note of triumph in her voice. "This is huge, Pam." Before Pam could respond, her office phone rang. The caller ID showed U.S. District Court, Middle District of Florida. She and Lauren exchanged glances before Pam picked up. "Pamela Bondi speaking." "Ms. Bondi, this is Judge Mercer's office." Chief Judge Eleanor Mercer was Hoffman's superior, the administrative head of the district. "Judge Mercer would like to speak with you." A moment later, Judge Mercer's authoritative voice came on the line. "Ms. Bondi, I've been made aware of the situation in Judge Hoffman's courtroom today." "Yes, Your Honor," Pam replied cautiously. "I want to be clear that I'm not discussing the merits of any potential appeal or motion you Might file. That would be inappropriate. However, as Chief Judge, I have administrative concerns about today's events. Pam remained silent, waiting. Judge Hoffman has agreed to a chambers conference with all parties tomorrow morning at 8:30 before the regular session begins. I will be attending via video conference. I trust this is acceptable to you. The involvement of the Chief Judge changed everything. This wasn't just about Hoffman wanting to meet privately anymore. This was an intervention from above. Yes, Your Honor, my counsel and I will be there. Good. And Ms. Bondi? Yes. This situation has attracted significant attention. I would appreciate discretion regarding tomorrow's conference until a resolution has been reached. Of course, Your Honor. After the call ended, Pam looked at Lauren, who had heard enough to understand the significance. The Chief Judge is stepping in, Lauren said, eyes wide. That almost never happens. This isn't just about me anymore, Pam replied. Hoffman's actions have created a public relations nightmare for the entire district. They're in damage control mode. Do you think they'll make him rescind the fine? Pam considered this. Maybe, or they might offer a compromise to make this go away quietly. But I'm not interested in quiet, Lauren. This is about principle now. Lauren nodded, understanding. What do you need from me? Get Jackson. We need to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. And call Jeffrey. He should know about this development. As Lauren left to make the calls, Pam turned to look out her office window at the Tampa skyline. The city lights reflected off the bay waters in the distance, a reminder of the beauty that existed beyond these legal battles. She reached for her cross again, feeling its familiar contours. When she'd put it on this morning, she could never have imagined the day that would unfold. A simple symbol of her faith had become the center of a constitutional showdown that could potentially impact courtrooms across Florida, perhaps even beyond. Jackson appeared at her door, legal pad in hand. Lauren filled me in. This is a positive development, but we need to be careful. Administrative interventions can go either way. Pam turned from the window. We're not settling, Jackson. Not unless Hoffman publicly rescinds the fine and acknowledges that wearing religious jewelry is constitutionally protected. That's a high bar, Pam. Judges rarely admit they're wrong, especially publicly. Then we proceed with the motion and take this as far as needed. She moved to her desk, purpose in every step. The Constitution doesn't bend to accommodate a judge's ego. And if they offer to quietly drop the fine, many attorneys would consider that a win. Pam met his gaze steadily. This stopped being about the money the moment Hoffman made his ruling. This is about ensuring that no other attorney faces similar treatment. Would you consider it a win if the next target is a Muslim attorney with a hijab or a Sikh with a turban? Jackson nodded, convinced. So we hold firm. What's our strategy for tomorrow? For the next hour, they outlined their approach, firm but respectful, principled but not antagonistic. They would listen to whatever the Chief Judge proposed, but make clear that anything short of a complete rescinding of the fine and acknowledgement of constitutional rights would be insufficient. By the time Jackson left, it was past 9 p.m. Pam should have been exhausted, but adrenaline and purpose kept her alert. She turned to the case files for Gulf Coast Manufacturing, determined that Jeffrey's interests wouldn't suffer because of her personal battle. She worked until midnight, meticulously preparing for the next day's witnesses and arguments. Only when she was confident that she was fully prepared for both the morning's chambers conference and the afternoon's trial proceedings did she finally pack up to leave. As she stepped out of her office building, the night air was thick with Florida humidity. The news vans had finally departed, but she knew they'd be back tomorrow. This story had legs: religious freedom, judicial overreach, a David versus Goliath narrative. The media wouldn't let it go easily. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My father is a deacon at First Baptist. We're all praying for you. Stand strong. Then another from a different number. Thank you for fighting against religious discrimination. My daughter wears a hijab and worries about her future as a law student. And another, "As a Jewish attorney who wears a Star of David, I appreciate you taking this stand." Message after message poured in, from strangers, from colleagues she hadn't spoken to in years, from law students and members of the public. Some had clearly gotten her number through professional networks, others through friends of friends. All expressed support, solidarity, and encouragement. Pam stood in the parking garage, scrolling through the messages, a lump forming in her throat. When she'd refused to remove her cross that morning, she'd acted on principle, on the conviction that her rights mattered. She hadn't considered how her stand might resonate with others who felt their own religious expressions were vulnerable. As she drove home through the quiet Tampa streets, she felt the weight of tomorrow's confrontation. This wasn't just about a fine anymore, or even about her personal rights. It had become something larger, a moment where fundamental principles would either be affirmed or eroded. At home, she found a FedEx envelope leaning against her door. Inside was a brief note from Martin Chen, her opposing counsel. "Pam, thought you might find this useful. Whatever our differences in the courtroom, some principles transcend the adversarial process. Martin." Beneath the note was a photograph, clearer than the Twitter version, showing Chen standing at his table in Hoffman's courtroom, a Star of David lapel pin clearly visible on his suit jacket. The timestamp in the corner showed a date, just 3 weeks earlier. It was the evidence she needed to prove Hoffman's selective enforcement. Chen had risked professional relationships to provide it. Inside her home, Pam finally allowed herself to feel the full emotional impact of the day. The arbitrary fine, the public exposure, the messages of support, the unexpected allies. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had shown her something important. She wasn't standing alone. She set her alarm for 5 a.m., knowing she needed to be razor-sharp for the morning's confrontation. As she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, the gold cross still hanging at her neck, where it had been for thousands of court appearances before today. "Remember who you are," her grandmother had said. "Stand for something, or you'll fall for anything." Tomorrow she would stand. The morning dawned with a brilliant Florida sunrise, casting golden light across Tampa Bay. Pam arrived at the federal courthouse at 7:45 a.m., a full 45 minutes before the scheduled chambers meeting. She wanted time to center herself, to prepare for whatever lay ahead. The courthouse steps were already crowded. Dozens of people had gathered, many wearing crosses, Stars of David, or other religious symbols. Some held handmade signs. "Religious freedom is not negotiable." And "Stand with Pam." A group of law students from Stetson University stood together, each wearing small cross pendants in solidarity. As Pam climbed the steps, a spontaneous applause broke out. She nodded in acknowledgement but kept moving. This wasn't about attention or acclaim, it was about principle. Inside, Jackson waited by the security checkpoint, his expression serious but confident. "You ready for this?" he asked as they walked toward Judge Hoffman's chambers. "More than ready," Pam replied, her voice steady. "Did you bring the evidence packet?" Jackson patted his briefcase. "Everything's here. The photo of Chen wearing the Star of David, documentation of Hoffman's Masonic ring, the precedent cases, and our formal motion to vacate. They arrived at Hoffman's chambers at 8:15. Sarah, the young clerk who had provided the tip about Hoffman's Bible, avoided eye contact as she led them to a small conference room adjacent to the judge's private office. "They're not here yet," she said quietly. "Judge Mercer will be joining by video conference on that screen." She pointed to a large monitor on the wall. As Sarah left, Pam arranged her materials methodically, placing each document exactly where she would need it. Jackson watched her with admiration. "You know," he said, "most attorneys would be a nervous wreck right now." Pam smiled slightly. "Who says I'm not? I just prefer to channel it productively." At exactly 8:30, the door opened. Judge Hoffman entered, followed by Martin Chen, who had been invited as opposing counsel. Hoffman's face was a careful mask, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his discomfort. He had clearly not expected the situation to escalate this far. "Good morning," he said stiffly, taking his seat at the head of the table. The monitor flickered to life, revealing Chief Judge Eleanor Mercer, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness and meticulous adherence to judicial ethics. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," Judge Mercer began. "I understand we have a rather unusual situation to address. Judge Hoffman, perhaps you should begin by explaining yesterday's contempt citation." Hoffman straightened in his chair. "Yesterday, I instructed Ms. Bondi to remove a religious symbol she was wearing in my courtroom. When she refused, I issued a contempt citation and an appropriate fine. $100,000 is appropriate for wearing jewelry." Jackson interjected, unable to contain himself. "Counselor," Judge Mercer warned from the screen, "let's maintain decorum." She turned her attention back to Hoffman. "Judge Hoffman, please explain the legal basis for prohibiting religious jewelry in your courtroom." Hoffman cleared his throat. "It's a matter of maintaining neutrality. Religious symbols can create an impression of bias or preference for certain beliefs." "And do you prohibit all religious symbols, Judge Hoffman?" Pam asked, her voice calm but pointed. Hoffman's eyes narrowed. "This isn't an interrogation, Ms. Bondi." "No," Judge Mercer interrupted, "but it is a relevant question. Do you apply this restriction uniformly, Judge Hoffman?" A heavy silence filled the room. Hoffman hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice. "I apply rules as appropriate to maintain the dignity of my courtroom," he finally said, evading the direct question. "Excellent," Judge Mercer said. "Is there anything else that needs to be addressed before regular proceedings begin?" Pam glanced at Jackson, who gave a subtle nod. They had achieved their primary objectives, the fine vacated and a formal acknowledgement of religious expression rights. "No, Your Honor," Pam replied. "Thank you for your time." As Judge Mercer's screen went dark, the room remained silent for a moment. Hoffman gathered his papers without making eye contact with anyone. "Regular session begins at 10 a.m., he said tersely before exiting. Martin Chen approached Pam as they left the conference room. "That was masterfully done," he said quietly. "I'm glad the photograph helped." "I appreciate your integrity, Martin," Pam replied. "It couldn't have been easy to provide evidence against a judge you appear before regularly." Chen shrugged. "Some principles transcend professional convenience. See you in court." As they walked through the courthouse corridor, Jackson let out a low whistle. "That went better than I expected." Mercer basically forced his hand. "She did what chief judges are supposed to do," Pam replied. "Uphold the Constitution, even when it means checking one of their own." Outside, the crowd had grown. Word had somehow spread that Pam was meeting with the judges, and people were waiting for news. When she appeared at the top of the steps, a hush fell over the gathering. For a moment, Pam considered simply walking past. This wasn't about publicity or personal acclaim. But she recognized that these people weren't just there for her. They were there for what she represented, the principle that religious expression couldn't be arbitrarily punished. She stepped forward. "The contempt citation and fine have been vacated," she announced. "Judge Hoffman will issue a formal order acknowledging that religious jewelry is protected expression in his courtroom." A cheer erupted from the crowd. News cameras captured the moment as people embraced each other in celebration. It wasn't just Pam's victory. It was a victory for everyone who valued religious freedom. A young woman pushed through the crowd to reach Pam. She couldn't have been more than 20, clearly a law student based on the book she clutched. "Ms. Bondi," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I wear a hijab. I've been terrified about how I'll be treated in courtrooms after I pass the bar. What you did, It matters to people like me. Pam squeezed the young woman's hand. Then it was worth every moment of stress. Pam reached into her folder and placed the photograph of Martin Chen on the table. Your Honor, this photograph shows Attorney Chen wearing a Star of David pin in your courtroom just 3 weeks ago. No fine was issued. No contempt citation was given. Hoffman's face flushed. That was an oversight. Was it? Pam placed another document on the table. This is a sworn statement from court reporter Melissa Jenkins, confirming that you wear a Masonic ring during proceedings. The Freemasons have religious connotations, yet you wear this symbol openly while fining me for wearing a cross. A day. Mercer leaned closer to her camera. Judge Hoffman, is this accurate? Hoffman's jaw tightened. The Masonic Order is a fraternal organization, not a religion. With religious undertones and spiritual symbolism, Pam countered. The point, Your Honor, is selective enforcement. If neutrality truly mattered to you, you would apply the standard consistently. This is completely inappropriate, Hoffman snapped, his composure cracking. What's inappropriate, Jackson interjected, is a $100,000 fine for constitutionally protected expression. Judge Mercer held up a hand. Ms. Bondi, I understand you've prepared a formal motion to vacate the contempt order. Yes, Your Honor. Pam handed copies to everyone in the room. This motion cites 14 Supreme Court cases affirming that personal religious expression is protected under the First Amendment and that the government, including the courts, cannot prohibit such expression without a compelling interest that meets strict scrutiny. Judge Mercer scanned the document on her own copy that had been emailed to her. This is quite thorough, Ms. Bondi. Additionally, Pam continued, I've prepared documentation showing that the fine amount is unprecedented and clearly punitive. The largest previous contempt fine for an attorney in this district was $5,000 for disrupting proceedings by shouting at a witness. My cross disrupted nothing. The room fell silent as Judge Mercer continued reading. Finally, she looked up. Judge Hoffman, after reviewing these materials, do you wish to reconsider yesterday's ruling? All eyes turned to Hoffman. His position was untenable, and everyone knew it. The evidence of selective enforcement combined with the constitutional precedents and the excessive fine made his ruling indefensible. I maintain that I have the authority to control my courtroom, he said stiffly. No one is questioning your authority to maintain order, Judge Mercer replied, her tone sharpening. What's at issue is whether prohibiting a small religious symbol constitutes a legitimate exercise of that authority, particularly when applied selectively. The implied rebuke hung in the air. Hoffman's jaw worked silently as he considered his options. In light of Ms. Bondi's motion, Judge Mercer continued, and given the constitutional questions raised, I believe the prudent course would be to vacate the contempt order and fine. It wasn't a suggestion. Though phrased diplomatically, Judge Mercer was using her authority as chief judge to provide Hoffman a graceful exit from the corner he'd painted himself into. Hoffman hesitated, then nodded curtly. Very well. The contempt citation and fine are vacated. Pam had won, but she wasn't finished. Thank you, Your Honor. But there's still the matter of the court record. I would like a formal acknowledgement that wearing religious jewelry does not violate courtroom rules and is constitutionally protected expression. Hoffman's eyes flashed with anger. You've got your fine rescinded, Counselor. Don't push your luck. It's not about luck, Pam replied calmly. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to another attorney in the future. Judge Mercer's voice cut through the tension. I believe Ms. Bondi's request is reasonable. Judge Hoffman, please prepare a written order vacating the contempt citation and clarifying that personal religious jewelry is permitted in your courtroom, consistent with First Amendment protections. This will create a clear record for the future. Hoffman looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. I'll prepare the order today. By 10 a.m., the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls. Judge Hoffman entered, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Before we continue with Gulf Coast Manufacturing versus Coastal Suppliers," he began, his voice neutral, "I have an order to read into the record." He lifted a document and began reading. "The contempt citation and fine issued yesterday against attorney Pamela Bondi are hereby vacated in their entirety. Upon further consideration and review of relevant constitutional precedents, this court acknowledges that the wearing of personal religious jewelry, including but not limited to crosses, Stars of David, and other symbols, is protected expression under the First Amendment and does not violate courtroom decorum or neutrality when worn in a non-disruptive manner." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Pam maintained her professional composure, but inside, a wave of satisfaction washed over her. This wasn't just a personal vindication. It was now legal precedent that would protect others. "Now," Judge Hoffman continued, regarding the contract dispute. The rest of the morning proceeded with remarkable normalcy. Hoffman was meticulously fair in his rulings, seemingly determined to demonstrate his impartiality. By noon, Pam had presented compelling testimony from Gulf Coast's production manager that significantly strengthened their case. During the lunch recess, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, but Pam kept her comments brief and focused on the constitutional principles at stake rather than personal triumph. "This case was never about me," she told the cameras. "It was about affirming that our constitutional rights don't disappear when we enter a courtroom. Every American should be able to wear symbols of their faith without fear of punishment." As the day progressed, messages of support continued to pour in. The Florida Bar Association released a statement commending the resolution and announcing the formation of a task force to review courtroom policies regarding religious expression. 3 national legal organizations requested permission to use the case as a teaching example in their continuing legal education programs. By late afternoon, Jeffrey's case was building momentum. The opposing side's key witness had contradicted himself under Pam's careful cross-examination, and even Judge Hoffman had to sustain her objections when Chen's questions strayed beyond proper scope. When court adjourned for the day, Jeffrey pulled her aside. "That was brilliant work, Pam, both with the judge this morning and with the witnesses this afternoon." "Thank you, Jeffrey. Tomorrow should be even better. How are you so focused, after everything that's happened?" Pam smiled. "Because that's my job. Your case matters just as much as the constitutional issue." Jeffrey shook his head in admiration. "Next board meeting, we're doubling your retainer. Not because of the publicity, but because you've proven you'll fight for what's right, no matter the cost." 3 days later, the trial concluded with a decisive victory for Gulf Coast Manufacturing. Judge Hoffman, perhaps conscious of the scrutiny now focused on his courtroom, had been scrupulously fair throughout the proceedings. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict in Jeffrey's favor, awarding the full damages requested. As Pam gathered her materials, preparing to leave the courtroom for the last time, she noticed Judge Hoffman watching her from the bench. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not quite an apology, but something approaching professional respect. Outside, Tampa was bathed in golden afternoon light. News trucks still lined the street, but their numbers had dwindled as the story evolved from controversy to resolution. Pam had declined most interview requests, agreeing only to a single in-depth conversation with the American Bar Association Journal to discuss the constitutional implications of the case. Back at her office, Lauren had transformed the conference room into an impromptu celebration space. The entire team was there, along with Jeffrey and Martin Chen, who had stopped by to offer his congratulations despite representing the losing side. "To Pam," Jackson said, raising a glass of champagne, "who reminded us all that some battles choose you, but how you fight them defines you." As glasses clinked, Pam's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Sarah, Judge Hoffman's clerk, Ms. Bondi. I wanted you to know that Judge Hoffman has withdrawn his name from consideration for the 11th Circuit. He cited personal reasons, but those of us in chambers know the truth. Your stand, made a difference beyond just your case. I've decided to leave my clerkship early and have accepted a position with the Religious Freedom Legal Defense Fund. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like in a courtroom. Respectfully, Sarah. Mitchell. Pam smiled as she read the message. Change often came in unexpected ways, through unplanned moments of principled resistance. The celebration continued into the evening. Around 8 p.m., Lauren approached with a tablet. You should see this, she said, her expression serious. The screen showed a breaking news alert. Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission opens investigation into Judge Raymond Hoffman's conduct. They're reviewing all his past rulings for evidence of religious bias, Lauren explained. 3 other attorneys have now come forward with similar stories. Pam handed the tablet back. That's not why I did this. I know, Lauren replied. But it's still an important outcome. Who knows how many others he might have targeted if you hadn't stood your ground. Later that night, as the office finally quieted, Pam stood at her window overlooking Tampa Bay. The city lights reflected off the water, countless points of brightness in the darkness. She thought about all the messages she'd received, from attorneys of different faiths, from law students worried about their future, from ordinary citizens who saw in her stand something that resonated with their own values. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Pamela Bondi, she answered. Ms. Bondi, this is Justice Thomas Mitchell of the Supreme Court. Pam straightened in shock. Justice Mitchell, this is an unexpected honor. I've been following your case with interest, the justice said. Your constitutional argument was impeccable. I'm calling because the Judicial Conference is forming a special committee to review guidelines for religious expression in federal courtrooms, and we'd like you to serve as a consultant. I would be honored, Your Honor, Pam replied, her voice steady despite her surprise. Excellent, my clerk will send the details tomorrow. And Ms. Bondi? Yes, Justice Mitchell. That cross you wore, you were right to stand your ground. The Constitution doesn't defend itself. It needs people willing to bear the cost of upholding its principles. After they hung up, Pam remained by the window, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past 3 days. When she'd put on her cross necklace that fateful morning, she could never have imagined where it would lead, to a constitutional showdown, a precedent-setting ruling, and now an opportunity to help shape policy for courtrooms across the nation. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Remember who you are. Stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. Pam touched the small gold cross at her neck, feeling its familiar contours. In standing for her own rights, she had ultimately stood for something much larger. The principle that in America, faith wasn't something to be hidden away or punished, but protected as a fundamental freedom. Outside, the Tampa skyline glittered against the night sky. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, and now a new national role. But tonight, Pam simply savored the quiet victory of having faced intimidation and emerged stronger. Not just for herself, but for all who would come after her. Some battles weren't chosen. They chose you. And sometimes those unexpected battles created the most important victories of all. The end.